Until recently, JavaScript had only two kinds of scope: global scope and function scope. All external scripts that you link to in your page are added to the global scope. And this was okay as long as all the external scripts were very careful to minimize the global variables they used, but sometimes it could cause problems. What if you're using a global variable, like with the name dog, and you link to an external file that also uses a global variable with the name dog? Well, you can't have two global variables with the name dog. JavaScript modules can help solve this problem. JavaScript modules essentially add a new scope to your programs. A module hides all the variables in a piece of code unless you explicitly export a variable from the module and import it into another module. So let's say you have a program like this. We have some code in module.js that declares a dog named Fido with a global variable dog. Now let's say I want to use module.js in my code. But I forget, or I don't know that module.js is declaring a global variable dog. So I redeclare dog and set it to Spot, whereas I'm setting it to Fido in my module.js file. Now, in older versions of the browser, I would load this page and I would not get an error. I would just see that the dog name is Spot in the console because we're loading module.js first, and then we're overriding the value of dog with the value Spot. Now I'm on Chrome 66, and that means that Chrome is actually checking to make sure that I'm not redeclaring variables that have already been declared. Thank you, Chrome. So when I try to load the page, I get this error. Identifier dog has already been declared. So whenever we declare global variables in our JavaScript files, we're risking clashing with global variables in scripts and in pages that link to those files. So modules help to avoid these problems. By using a module, you're essentially creating another local scope that's defined by the module. That is, either by a JavaScript file that's imported as a module, or in a script tag with the type module. So let's take a look at an example. So I'm going to change this example so that module.js is a module instead of just a file that I'm linking to. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove that link to module. And now what I need to do is import the module in my page script like this. So I'm saying to import with the import keyword, and then in curly braces, I'm specifying that the variable name that I'm importing. So if I look back over at the module.js file, I see the variable name is dog. And then I tell it the file to import from. And in this case, that's module.js. Now you do need to specify a relative path. So here, even though module.js is in the same folder, I need to specify /, meaning the module.js is in the same folder. So it won't work without that. Now we're importing dog from module.js, which means that we have to export it from the module. So if I go over to module.js, I need to add export as the keyword. So now we're exporting the variable dog, and we're importing it from that file into our script in this page. Now there's one more thing we have to do, but I want to show you what happens if you forget to do this so that you know what to expect. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to reload the page, and it gives me an error, syntax error, unexpected token curly brace. The reason that you're getting this error is because we have to add type equals module onto the script. And we have to do this because we can only import modules into another module. So if I go here and I add type equals module to the script, now my script is defining another module. So now I can import from one module into another. So this is a limitation of modules. You can only import and export to and from modules. This is also going to have implications for scope in this file, which we'll talk about in a minute. For right now, I'll leave the definition of dog equals spot, and so you can see the error that we get, because again, I'm going to be trying to redefine dog even though I'm loading it from the module now. So I'll try to reload the page and we're going to get a different kind of error. Now we're going to see identifier dog has already been declared. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And I'm going to reload the page and we see that dog name is Fido. So what do you think will happen if I try to change the value of dog? So we're not going to redeclare dog because we've already declared it in the module and we're importing that module. So what if I just say dog equals spot? So I'll save that, reload the page. Now we see assignment to constant variable, and this is a type error. That's because I can't modify a variable that I'm loading from a module from outside that module. I can modify it from inside the module, though. If I put that same line of code in module.js instead, I can change the value of dog. So let's do that. So I'm going to erase it from here, save that file, and I can say dog equals spot inside the module itself. So now if I reload, now we see dog name is spot. So in the module, I'm declaring dog, setting it to Fido, and then I'm changing the value of dog to spot. So when I go to print out the dog name here, it's spot, not Fido. So modules allow you to read values but not assign values from outside that module. So what if I want to be able to change the value of dog from another module? Well, I have to write a setter function in the module. So let's do that. So I'm going to add a function, change dog here. I'm going to go ahead and erase this line here. So now, of course, remember that we cannot access the change dog function from our other module unless we export it. So I have to go ahead and add export in front of change dog so that I can see it in my other module. So now that I've exported it, I can come back over here to my module and I can add change dog as another variable. In this case, that's a function that I'm importing into this module from another module, the module in module.js. I could write a separate import statement, but it's easier just to add the import that's already there, so I can just add it to the end there. So now I'm importing both dog, a variable, and change dog, a function. So now I can call change dog, and we should see that the value of dog is updated from Fido to spot, and we do. So what about objects? I've added a class cat to my module, so let's take a look at that. You can see here the class cat. And so underneath that, I am creating a new cat and assigning it to the variable Fluffy. And I'm exporting Fluffy, so we should be able to access Fluffy from our other module. Notice that I'm not exporting the class cat. So only the new cat object that I've made, Fluffy, is going to be available and visible to the other module if I import it. Now let's see what happens if I try to import the class cat that's not being exported. So you get familiar with that error, and you should see the requested module, module.js, does not provide an export named cat. So that's the error you'll get if you try to import something that you're not exporting. So let me change that to Fluffy. And so now when we try to print out Fluffy, hopefully we will see Fluffy in the console. And we do. So there is Fluffy. Now, take a look at this Fluffy object. So it's an object and it's got one property, name. Its current value is Fluffy. So what happens if I try to change Fluffy's name to something else? So here I'm going to try to change it to Pickles. And will we see the same error that we saw before when I tried to change the dog? What do you think? Let me reload the page. Oh, no error. We see that the cat's name has indeed been changed to Pickles. Well, that's interesting. So I can't change the value of a variable, but I can change the property of an object. And that's because what's protected by the module scope is the reference to the object, not the properties in the object. And I can even add a new property to Fluffy if I want. So I can come in here and add a property age and set Pickles age to 3. And then when we look at Pickles, then we see that Pickles does indeed have a new property named age. Now, what I cannot do is assign a whole new value to Fluffy. So if I try to do Fluffy equals another cat, so I'm trying to change the value of Fluffy from the object that I've imported to another value, a string, we should indeed see an error, and we do. So now we're again trying to assign to a constant variable, and that's that Fluffy reference that's to an object. So just notice here that we can change the properties in an object, but we cannot change the object reference itself. So modules give you some protection around the variables that you have in your module, and that's a good thing. Now I also want to show you how you can export a class to use in another module. So that's pretty easy. Let's make another class. So here I've got a class dog, which has a constructor named breed and weight. So I'm making new dogs with these 3 properties, and I'm exporting the whole class by putting that export keyword in front of the class. So if I want to import this class dog, I can come back over to my other module, and I can import it into this module here, and then I can use that class to make dog objects. So here I'm making a new dog Fido, and just printing Fido to the console. So let's give that a try. And we see that I am creating a new dog Fido, no problem, with that class that I imported. So that's how you can export a class and use that class when you import it in your modules to create new objects. Now I also want to show you how you can use a function to modify a private variable in a module. And this is something you might find yourself doing fairly often, because basically it allows you to create private variables and then provide getter and setter methods to access those variables. Let's say we add a variable count to the module.js file. Now I'm not going to export count, but what I am going to do is add a function inc_counter that increments that count and then prints the value of the count. So what we're doing here is I'm creating a private variable count. And so outside this module, nobody can change count unless they're going through that inc_counter function. So I'm going to go back to the other module, and I'm going to import inc_counter. Now we're importing a function here, and I'm going to call it twice, so you can see the counter being incremented. So I'm going to reload that page, and you can see that we have count equals 1 and then count equals 2, corresponding to the 2 times that we call inc_counter. So that's how you can create private variables in modules with methods that allow you to perform operations on those variables, and that can come in very handy. Now, of course, if I try to access or change the value of count in my module here, I'm going to get an error because I cannot access count because it's in the other module and I did not export it or import it. So, good way to make private variables. Now, finally, I'm going to take a simple test variable and print it out so I can show you one more thing. So this is just a normal variable in my module in the page. And in a regular JavaScript program that's in a page, I can use the console to access the variables at the top level of my script. And this variable certainly looks like it's at the top level, but remember, it's actually inside a module because we added type equals module on this script. So I cannot access this variable from the console. So if I reload the page, I can see that test variable, but if I try to access it in the console, I cannot. So if I want to access variables in a script in the page, I have to add another script and do it there. And now I should be able to access test, and I can. But remember that we cannot access the variables that we defined in the module from this other script because they're inside a module. So if I tried to access Fido, I should get an error. And I do. Uncaught reference error Fido is not defined. And that's because this script is a module, and this script is just a regular top-level script in the JavaScript like we're used to writing. So let's take a look at, I'm going to reload real quick, and then let's take a look at the Sources tab. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a breakpoint right here, and I'm going to reload the page. So now my code has run. So all of this code, the import code and all of the code in this module has run, and we're broken right here just before the second increment of count. And I want you to look over on the right-hand side and see under scope, we've now got two different scopes. We've got the module scope and we've got the global scope. So everything that's defined in the module scope that's been exported is visible inside this area. So you can see we've got our dog, we've got our change dog function, we've got our dog variable, we've got our cat Fluffy, and we've got our ink counter function. And that corresponds to everything from this file that we're exporting. So there's dog, change dog, Fluffy, dog, and ink counter. So that should correspond to what we see here. Now notice that test is going to show up under global variables. And also take a look, and none of those variables that we imported into the module in this page are visible in global variables, and neither is Fido. So if we look for Fido here, we will not find Fido, and that's because Fido is in a module in the main page. It's not in the global scope. So it's in the module scope, but it's not exported. So we do not see Fido. Fido is completely private. So if we go all the way down to the T's, there we go. There's our test variable. So that's the basics of how modules work. They essentially create a new scope. They allow you to create private variables. They allow you to create variables that are only accessible through functions, as you saw. So it's a good way to provide access to code, but with restrictions, so that if you're giving code to somebody else, for instance, you know that they're not going to mess up the value of your counter if they can only access it through an increment function or a getter or setter method. So a good reason to use modules is to help avoid those name clashes in JavaScript, to keep variables out of the global scope when they don't need to be there, and give you more control over how your top-level variables are accessed and modified. Earlier versions of JavaScript that just put all top-level variables in the global scope made it super easy to test and interact with your code via the console, but it also made it easy to make mistakes. So I think that modules are an improvement in JavaScript ES6, and they're pretty easy to use once you get the hang of the basic rules. There are quite a few other details about ways to use modules, so for all of those details, check out an online reference for JavaScript modules. An especially good one, in my opinion, is the chapter on modules in exploringjs.com. All right, that's it for modules. Don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching.